Welcome to the Nursing Mother's Room. Today's conversation is about raising a child with Down syndrome. It's about the moment everything changed, the fears that followed, the stereotypes that didn't hold true, and the unexpected joy that came from a diagnosis that many parents are taught to fear. We're also having this conversation in light of a recent story that has sparked a lot of discussion online, a baby who was aborted after receiving a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome. We recognize that this is a deeply sensitive topic, and our goal today is not to condemn or shame anyone. We'll talk about grief, hope, advocacy, and what it really looks like to raise a child whose life has brought immeasurable love to the people around them. We'll discuss some of the fears parents face when they receive the diagnosis, misconceptions that still exist about Down syndrome, and what these parents wish others knew. Whether you're a parent raising a child with Down syndrome, someone who has recently received a diagnosis, or simply someone who wanted to better understand this community, I believe today's conversation will challenge assumptions, offer encouragement, and remind us of the dignity and worth inherent of every human life. So wherever you're listening, from the nursery, the school pickup line, over a sink full of dishes, I'm so glad you're here. Hello and welcome to the Nursing Mother's Room. We are very excited to have a special guest on today. Francesca is here to share with us her journey into motherhood. I am so glad to have you on. We were talking a little bit before this about your journey into motherhood and how you had your children in your later 30s. And I guess for some people in this day and age that they are either prolonging pregnancy, prolonging being parents, or they're just kind of having kids later in life. I would like for you to just even start with that and kind of talk about what it was like for you finding out that you were pregnant later on in life and, just kind of how your journey has been.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I didn't get married till I was 35, so it was automatically going to be a later journey for me. And we did start trying, I think, a year after, like really trying, after about a year after we got married, and it took me a little bit to get pregnant. So then there was that fear of, oh my goodness, am I going to be able to have children? And then of course I got pregnant with my daughter, and I had my first child at 38, and then I had my son at 39. And so, yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know, I didn't have my kids when I was in my 20s, but from what I hear, it is a little bit harder on your body and things like that when you're older, but I managed and navigated that. My pregnancies were high risk because I was an older mom, and so definitely had to navigate those challenges with having the extra appointments and the extra things. I actually wanted to do more of a home birth and wasn't able, to do that just because of the nature of the challenges that could come up with having my pregnancy older.
With your daughter, you were already considered a high-risk pregnancy just because of your age. Were there any complications while you were pregnant with her?
Yeah, I had high blood pressure with her, and so they were monitoring that. And she was measuring small on the ultrasounds, and so I was like, I just want to have a normal pregnancy, but.
But besides that, how was your pregnancy overall, besides having the high blood pressure and then your delivery with her?
Yeah, my delivery was smooth. My pregnancy was pretty smooth overall. I mean, it was just the high blood pressure. And I actually went into labor at 37 weeks, which is considered full term. And I just went in for my blood pressure check, and the nurse said, let's check you. We haven't checked you in a little bit. So she checked to see, how many centimeters I was, and she was like, oh my goodness, you're in labor. You're 6 centimeters. And I didn't even know. I thought I was just having Braxton Hicks. So went into labor, and I think I was in active labor, for 45 minutes, and she came pretty quick. So.
Oh my goodness. That is definitely, I think that's the dream for most moms of thinking like, hey, I don't even know if I'm in labor, and then going in and being like, all right, your baby's coming, It's definitely wild how, even just having high blood pressure, obviously there's the risk with it, but how there's so much extra precaution and care when you have high blood pressure, just because it can cause so many different issues, like with your body, with your pregnancy, with your babies. And so I'm very glad that you were able to have somewhat of a smooth pregnancy with her. So you said you had her at 38 and then you got pregnant with your son at 39. So it was kind of a quick turnaround of getting pregnant again the second time.
So how was that?
Yes. So my daughter was my daughter did not, she was tiny, so she didn't sleep great. And so she didn't start sleeping through the night until she was about 8 months old. And I remember the challenges of that, the sleepless nights, the feeling of like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to be normal again? Sleep deprivation is a form of torture. And so that feeling of being sleep deprived for 8 months and feeling like you're a little bit crazy. And I just remember this like, oh my goodness, am I ever going to be normal again? Is life going to ever be normal again? And when she started sleeping through the night, then it was like, oh, there I am. There's normalcy. And then I started to have the thought, because, oh, well, maybe I could have one more. Because prior to that, I was like, oh, we're one and done. Like, this is too hard. But then when she started sleeping, I thought, oh, I could do this again. And then I found out a few weeks later I was pregnant with Preston. So they were 17 months apart. And I had them pretty close together.
Yeah, so with your son Preston, he was diagnosed with Down syndrome. And so that's kind of where we wanted to have this conversation today. I don't know if you know too much of the story of the somewhat influencers that decided to abort their baby after they got a diagnosis for that child with Down syndrome as well. So in light of that, I know there has been a lot of people that are, a lot of parents and a lot of people in the community that are talking about, their diagnosis, the things that they were feeling, kind of putting themselves in the same shoes as these people, but they had their babies. They have their children. They chose to walk out those journeys. And so, what was your reaction when you first heard about this couple and their decision?
Wow. Yeah. So, I understand obviously the uncertainty and the fear that comes with receiving those negative doctor reports because I received them, or concerning, or whatever you want to call it, not what you were intending or picturing. So I understand that journey. I lived it. I think what was so, it was upsetting, but I think what was so upsetting and even offensive was that the insinuation that a person with a disability, or specifically a person with Down syndrome, isn't a life worth living, and that it's a crappy life, and, just to be eliminated, and let's try again and hope for a better outcome next time. And then to justify that choice, publicly justify and defend that choice based on false assumptions and facts, So I feel like, for years we've made so much advancement with inclusion, eliminating the R word, all of the resources and things that are available for individuals with disability now, early intervention programs, resources, schooling, therapies. There's so much available. We've made so much progress, and then to have, someone with a platform come in with no experience or expertise whatsoever regarding Down syndrome, and then spread a false narrative and inaccurate statistics as though they were facts. And so I really didn't dive too much into their posts, and I never heard of them prior to this situation. But one thing I did hear was that he was asked, if he was glad he wasn't aborted, and his response was, yes, but I'm normal. And my response to that was, someone that could respond that way, you might be neurotypical, but you're far from normal. To be able to belittle, devalue, dehumanize an entire group of people without any regard or remorse, to me, that's far from normal. So that was kind of my, I think, processing. I think that's what was so offensive. They made their choice. They had a choice. They made it. Like I said, I understand all the fear and the worry and the disappointment and all of that they were navigating. But the way that it was communicated, that basically people with Down syndrome are garbage. They didn't say those words. That's my word. I just felt in my heart. I was like, I can't be silent. I don't post a lot on social media, and I don't. I mean, I post my family and things like that, but I don't typically get into political things or debates or anything. But when I saw that post, I was like, oh, I'm all over this one for the sake of my son and his friends and others.
I think it's just so, I don't know, it's heartbreaking when people feel like that's like their only option. But part of it I feel too has just been like you said, they don't know. So it's like ignorance in this
Yeah.
situation and thinking that like this is the only option without actually like understanding or seeing, the other side of things or understanding. And again, part of it is, that they did make their choice. But I had seen a lot of comments. I didn't go to the actual post itself because I don't want to give them more monetization for their posts and everything. But I heard that a lot of people were commenting and being like, this was a hard decision. Everybody just lay off of them, all this stuff. And it's like, yes, this is a very hard decision. They, one, did make the choice to do this. They also made the choice to make this public and to
Yeah.
post that. So when you post something and make it public, you are then open to scrutiny from the public. And not everybody's going to agree with you. Not everybody's going to be on the same page. And again, this is just such a hard topic because there is such a large community, and like you said, there are advancements, there is more technology, there is more support than people have probably had in the last like 10, 15 years. And so it's like heartbreaking, but I think there's a difference between like being in this place of, this is a hard decision, we had to make this decision, or we feel it's the right decision and stuff like that. And with the different comments of what he said, of even telling his wife, oh, well, at least we know you can get pregnant. Oh, well, this where they're at. It's a glitch. It's a glitch. It's like how do you think that that's okay? I just think it's just so heartbreaking to even be in that position. But again, I can't say that I've gone through, understanding that fear, understanding those diagnoses and stuff, but I do know that like even if I were put in the position where I'm at with my family and with my husband, it would be a no-brainer of taking care of our children and things like that. And so I do understand that there's a level of fear and there's a level of understanding that other people, other parents will never understand in this situation that they weren't even at the place to like give their child a chance. And again, that's my own opinion for that. And so I'm not judging that. I'm not judging them for that. But the comments and everything else that's added on top of that, that is what I think is very, very, very frustrating. I think that's where people are at of like, hey, you know what? Make your own choices and stuff, but you don't get to act like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought, I didn't think I was like super mom kind of mom. I think I'm a good mom. I think I'm a good mom to my kids, but I wasn't a nanny when I was younger. I was working. I worked since I was 14 and I worked full time since I was 18. So, didn't have my kids till I was 38. So literally was working full time for 20 years and didn't think I was like the special kind of mom that could raise a kid with a disability. Like I thought it took a special kind of, person. And so I do understand, like I said, I understand what they were navigating. I understand that, I don't know if I can do this. I remember having those thoughts, like, how do I do this, Lord? I don't know how to do this. But I think that's true of parenting in general. It can be hard, and just because there was a diagnosis in utero, you don't know what you're going to get necessarily once the baby's born. And so just to like eliminate and try again, like it's a video game, like, oh, I don't like how this game is going, so we're just going to reboot and try again. Like, it's just shocking to me. I can't even fathom it. My pregnancy with Preston was extremely difficult. It was a faith journey the entire time. It was a battle. I started having miscarriage symptoms at 12 weeks. And then his very first ultrasound, it was like, oh, the nuchal fold's too thick. And then the next ultrasound, it was, oh, things are measuring too small. His nose is too small. Extremities are too small. His, this is too small. And then I think it was the 16-week ultrasound, there was fluid around all of his organs. And I mean, it was just constant barrage of negative, negative, negative. And I remember the doctor even saying, you should meet with the genetics doctors or the genetics team, whatever it was called. And then, you could talk about your options. And my husband was like, what options? And I was like, whether or not to keep the pregnancy. And my husband was like appalled. He was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And then the doctor was actually offended at our response. and said, well, you'd be surprised how many people decide to terminate after they get a diagnosis. And we were like, we're not going to do that. And so we had just determined we wouldn't even allow that conversation. We didn't do the amniocentesis. I was already high risk. I didn't want to put any more risk. And we just determined, you know what, we're going to trust God. We're going to pray. We're going to stay in faith, and we're going to believe God that everything's going to be okay. And left that appointment, declined all the testing, declined all the follow-up. And I went home and I was like, you know, I'm not an ignorant person. I'm not in denial. I'm not like, la, 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 like, I don't care what they say. Everything's fine. I recognize, no, there's some concerns here, and there's some things going on where they were saying this could be fatal for both of you. We need to do more testing and seeing what's going on. But I knew that wasn't the right doctor for me. So we literally prayed. We watched a lot of sermons on faith and just got ourselves strengthened up and spent a lot of time in prayer. And then I reached back out to my original OB and told her where I was at and what I was navigating. I was like, listen, I'm a person of faith, and it is so hard to stand in faith when I'm constantly being barraged with negative reports and worst case scenarios. And legally, they have to tell you, right, what could happen. Otherwise, they're liable. So they're constantly telling you, well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be. And I couldn't take it. I'm like, I'm trying to have a healthy pregnancy, and this is stressing me out to the point to where this isn't healthy. Anyway, ended up getting a follow-up appointment with a doctor that was a believer. And at that next ultrasound, all of the concerns as far as the fluid and everything that they had been seeing was completely gone. And I told the doctor said, you know, I was very prepared for this to be a very difficult appointment today when I saw your last ultrasound. And she said, but I have to tell you, we're not seeing any of that fluid that we were seeing and any of those real concerns. And I said, well, that's what we prayed for. And she said, well, prayer works because this is a miracle. And so we had seen God move in my pregnancies. It was a battle every single appointment. I started having preterm labor scares at 31 weeks, went into the hospital for 5 days, got released, got sent home on bed rest. Again, had another preterm labor scare at 34 weeks, and then got released again after 5 days. and then went into... No, that one, that one I was actually 6 centimeters. And they told me, you're not going to go home until this baby's born. And I was like, I'm not having this baby premature. And so I prayed and prayed and prayed. And after 5 days, they checked me again, and I was 3 centimeters. And they said, that's impossible. You can't go backwards. And I said, well, I was 6 centimeters when they checked me in, and I was checked by 2 different doctors an hour apart. And they said, well, that's impossible. I said, no, that's God. That's prayer. And prayer works. And so we battled for Preston's life. And then, you know, I think you know my story. We didn't have any, you know, of the testing done beforehand. So we were expecting him to be completely healthy and diagnosis free when he was born. But then when he was born, we could see that there were some characteristics that would be indicative of Down syndrome, and the nurses were whispering and the things. And so they ended up testing his cord blood, and 8 days later we got the official diagnosis of Down syndrome, of having that third 21st chromosome.
So, wow, definitely a roller coaster. But it's always one of those things where I just feel like, you know, because we're believers and stuff, we have like an unfair advantage, you know what I mean, in these like and stuff, because you know, you hear these diagnoses, you hear these things, or you hear stuff that the doctors are telling you, and you're just like, yeah, but I have a bigger God. I have, you know, somebody backing me up and things like that. And I it's so wild that, like, how much advocacy you have to do for yourself in those moments, and, you know, that's definitely part of it, and I fully believe that life and death is in the power of the tongue, and so, even when I've been pregnant with both of my kids, it was, like, every single time that I found out that I was pregnant, instantly on social media, everything is like, miscarriages and this and that and all the crazy things and all the stuff. And I literally had to like delete social media from my phone, which is kind of hard because I work in social media and stuff too. And so it was definitely tough, but I'm just like, I have to protect what is going into my ears and my eyes and into my heart, because I'm going to start acting on that. I'm going to start believing that. And so that's why it's so powerful. And I tell all of my friends this, anybody who's like pregnant, be careful with what you're hearing, what you're seeing, all of these different things. And for me, my pregnancies were definitely rough. My birth and delivery with my son was wild. With my daughter, I ended up hemorrhaging, lost a liter of blood, had all kinds of crazy stuff happen, ended up with postpartum preeclampsia. But, and I've shared my story, but with new moms and stuff, or people that I come in contact with, I'm probably not going to tell them all the details of that. You know what I mean? I don't want to cause them to have a spirit of fear. Now, if they want to have conversations, they want to know the realistic side of things, because I was planning with my son to have um, a midwife, and we were planning to have him at a birthing center and all these things. And the minute that I went into labor early, that all went out the window. And, you know, I was like at the point to where I had tried to go 15 hours like unmedicated. And after that, they were like, you were at a point to where this is too severe for your body to handle. You need to get that epidural. You need to be on Pitocin and all these things. And so for me, I felt devastated for the longest time, feeling like my body failed me, you know, but even during all of that, you know, that's a whole other story and stuff. But even in that, it's like you have to be careful with what is going in and what, you know, where you're at and protecting yourself. And I feel like even towards the end of my pregnancy with her, because I had gestational diabetes, we were scheduling an induction and all these different things, that even just at that point, I'm seeing people post that they had a failed induction, they had to have a C-section, they had all these things, they had, you know, a ruptured placenta and all just kinds of stories. And, you know, and it was just like really hard to hear those things and to not kind of be like, "Oh my gosh, well, what about me? Could this be me? Could this be my baby?" And it's just very, very difficult, I think, even just being pregnant and trying to stay hopeful and faith, like in faith and believing, you know, for the best outcomes. And so I yeah, I can't imagine that kind of journey and having to be in those shoes and trying to like literally fight for your children. But having a doctor that is like advocating for you and believing with you makes all the difference. So all of that to say, you then go through this whole experience, and then you come to this place of now having your child and now understanding that, you know, why there could have been complications and stuff because of this extra chromosome for your son. So what was it like for you after that and like those first few weeks of having your son home with you?
Grateful that he was healthy and everything was okay, but then navigating the disappointment that there is a diagnosis, there is a, you know, disability there. I am a planner, and so I do like to be prepared and know things ahead, but I didn't research much on Down syndrome at all because there's so much there in the list of all the things that people with Down syndrome could possibly be more susceptible to. And so I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't allow that fear of what ifs to come into my heart and mind. So I really didn't. Unfortunately, I don't think I reached out enough to the support systems and the Down syndrome resources and communities that were available to me early on, because I didn't want to dive into this, okay, well, I'm a special needs mom now, and, you know, and then get it all this barrage of possible worst case scenarios. Not saying that the Down syndrome community would do that, but just the resources and things that you can find online. You know, I kind of started and was like, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. So it was a difficult journey. You know, navigating that, like, what does this look like? You know, my husband, I remember I could cry. I remember in the hospital room, him going, man, I wanted to coach his little league, and is he going to get married? And his, you know, and we're just like crying in what's supposed to be the happiest day of our life. We don't know, you know, all these things. Well, I'm happy to tell you now he plays Miracle League baseball. He horseback rides. He does he swims, he jumps into the pool and swims, and, you know, he does all the fun things.
You know, obviously there are a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions about children with Down syndrome. And I think part of it is again, like we say, like worst case scenarios, worst case, but, and I do believe that there is, on the outside of it, there is a reality to it because some children with Down syndrome need more medical attention than others. Were there any like medical diagnosis on that end that you were like concerned of for your son? Or where are things at with him and stuff today?
Yeah, so he did have, which can be common with Down syndrome. He did have a little hole in his heart and then an opening, a small opening in his valve. And so they had recommended, we did have to do the cardiology. We had to do all the specialty appointments. With the diagnosis of Down syndrome comes annual blood tests, or audiology. He wears glasses, so the ophthalmologist, cardiologist. And so we were seeing the cardiologist, and they recommended to close both of those, but when he was about a year old, and I just couldn't do it. I just was like, is there any way that we can wait? Would it do any harm? Like, I'm praying for it to close. Would it do any harm? And they said, well, we can wait a little bit. Well, one of them ended up closing on its own after the time that they said it would close. And so then I was like, great, one down, and so then I kept praying for the other one. And every year I kept pushing off the appointment. And it was getting smaller, but it wasn't to the point, and it wasn't harming him. But it got to the point to where when we moved a few years ago, and when we moved and saw a new cardiologist, they were like, we recommend it's time. He's 8 years old now, or whatever he was, 9. And so we recommend to go ahead and do this procedure. So we ended up having to do the closure. It wasn't open heart or anything. It was done through a catheter through his leg, and very simple procedure. And I'm grateful. He was seen at one of the best pediatric cardiology facilities in the nation. So, and everything went smooth and went great. He's very healthy. I do credit that to, I pray over him every day. I pray over my kids in general, but I specifically pray over him that he's healed and healthy and well. And even when he was early on, when he was in he was in these programs where he got speech therapy and physical therapy and occupational therapy and child development. So it was around a lot of other little kids, kind of like a preschool program with therapies. And he never got sick. He was the only one, he never got sick. And so I always just prayed over him, and he's been really healthy, aside from that one little heart situation, which is totally fine now. We'll never have to worry about it again. And then the other thing, which is disappointing, and we're praying that his hair grows back, but he does have alopecia, which can be common in individuals with Down syndrome. So he has pretty much total hair loss on his head. So he wears baseball caps all the time. But if anyone were to see him without his hat on, they assume that he has cancer because he doesn't have any hair. Well, I wouldn't say everybody assumes that, but I definitely would sometimes get the pity looks, like when we're in the store or something. And I'm like, no, he's fine. He's okay.
I think that's definitely a beautiful testimony, because I think that when parents or people get diagnosis like this, or even any kind of medical diagnosis, it's always worst case scenario, right? And I think, even in this instance with, with Down syndrome and stuff, it's always, the focus is always on what they can't do. And so I think with hearing your story, with hearing, other parents, and hearing, seeing so many people with Down syndrome go on to live beautiful lives, get married, and, be able to be on their own, take care of themselves, to be healthy, I think it's just such a beautiful thing, because if you're just so focused on the negative, of course, that's what people are gonna, they're gonna be afraid of, they're gonna be fearful of. And so I think hearing the beautiful testimonies and understanding that, that these people, that your son and other people can be healthy and just live these beautiful lives, I think is just such an amazing thing.
And when he was really young, I went to this learning and resource center for individuals with Down syndrome called Club 21. It's in Pasadena, California. And they had shared, he was not even a year old yet, but they had shared a statistic of research that had been done of individuals with Down syndrome. And the number one contributing factor to those that were thriving and excelling and doing well versus those that weren't was parent expectation. So it was like you put the expectation on your kid and they will rise to the occasion. And so those parents that weren't expecting them to amount to much or do much, they weren't thriving as much because they weren't being challenged. They were taking, sure, I'll take the least path of resistance, but those that were like, no, you're going to read. My son reads. My son does math, like you're going to read, you're going to do this, you're going to tie your shoes, you're going to do all these things. And they did it because the parents were expecting it and pushing it.
Just parenting in general, I think can have, you can make or break your children. How you're doing those things, whether you want to push them to their full potential and, push them into the things that the Lord is calling them to in their lives and stuff. If you're equipping them in that, of course they're going to soar. It's so heartbreaking because I feel like so many people are just misinformed. There's so much ignorance around, these kinds of topics. Understanding that like a diagnosis doesn't equate the actual life of a person. And I had even seen a clip from a podcast, and there was a person on there who has Down syndrome, and he's like, he goes, I don't see myself as a disabled person. He's like, I'm a gift from God. It's again hearing one side versus actually seeing somebody who has Down syndrome thriving and having, a very full life is beautiful to be able to see that they're more than a diagnosis. And I think that relates to anything. And so it's like, it's so frustrating that it just seems like there's still so much stigma around for so many people and people that I've interacted with, that they speak on behalf of people with Down syndrome and like, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that. And it's like, well, why don't you let them speak for themselves? Why don't you let them show you, let them prove you wrong? Because clearly your misconception of them is false, Yeah, it's definitely beautiful to hear and to see, your son and your family and, just kind of with where you guys are at. And even like we were talking earlier, your son just got promoted to the next grade, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he had his sixth grade promotion today. He just finished fifth grade, so he's promoting to sixth grade. And you should have seen the way he was celebrated. I think he got the loudest ovation out of everybody in the entire school. And everybody just loves my son. He's a joy. He honestly brings joy to everybody he meets. Everybody loves him. I call him the resident greeter at church because he goes up and treats everybody like their family. He goes around and gives everybody hugs. If he doesn't know them, then he says, hi, my name is Preston, what's your name? And then they say their name and he says, hi, so-and-so, nice to meet you. And gives them hugs, and he's a love. And he's so fun. He's class clown. He loves to make people laugh. He loves an audience. He's just Mr. Personality.
I was gonna say that reminds me of your husband, of trying to make people laugh and stuff. That was always one of our favorite things with him, was that he was always trying to make somebody laugh, But yeah, I also know that you had a poem that you sent over to me. If you feel comfortable with reading it.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful poem. Like I said, I didn't research much and didn't read a lot of the resources I was initially given, which in hindsight, I wish I would have read more and gotten a little bit more involved initially with the Down syndrome community. But I did read this poem early on, and it kind of shifted my paradigm, and so I'll read that for you. It says, Welcome to Holland by Emily Pearl Kingsley. I'm often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability, to try and help people who have not shared that unique experience to understand it, to imagine how it would feel. It's like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and make your wonderful plans. The Colosseum, the Michelangelo David, the gondolas in Venice. You may learn some handy phrases in Italian. It's all very exciting. After months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plan lands. The flight attendant comes in and says, Welcome to Holland. Holland, you say. What do you mean Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life, I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plan. They've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. The important thing is that they haven't taken you to a horrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence, famine, and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out, buy new guidebooks, and you must learn a whole new language, and you will meet a whole new group of people you would never have met. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy, less flashy than Italy. But after you've been there for a while, you can catch your breath, you look around, and you begin to notice that Holland has windmills, and Holland has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they've had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, yes, that is where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of that will never go away, because the loss of that dream is a very significant loss. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you may never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things about Holland.
Just from the first time that I read that, I think the biggest takeaway from it for me, obviously, again, in a very different situation, but I think just in motherhood in general, we come in with so many expectations. And the problem is that the disappointment is not that there's a, and again, I mean, there's disappointment in motherhood and different things and stuff, but I think it's just mainly built on our expectations. Understanding that motherhood, pregnancy, birth, delivery, parenthood in general is never going to go according to plan. And I think if there are a lot more people who went into just parenthood in general, or even their pregnancy journeys and stuff, understanding that there are, but just understanding and being flexible and knowing that like things can change, but this is the journey that I've been given, and believing that where they're at. And as Christians, I know that on our end, we believe that there is a purpose for everything, and understanding that things may not be the way that we thought that they were going to look, but knowing that the Lord has a plan and a purpose in this. And so it's again, and because he's walking through this with us, I know that I'm not alone. I know that this isn't going to be easy, but I know that he's with me and he's not going to leave me. I think it's the beautiful poem. And so I think kind of on your end, how with reading that poem, how was that making you feel when you first read it?
Yeah, this wasn't the trip I planned for, but I must stay. Like, here I am, and and now you've got to readjust. You can either live your life in disappointment of, man, this isn't Italy. It never will be Italy, and I'm never going to make it to Italy. Or you can embrace Holland and all the beautiful things, and find joy and contentment in your life the way it is currently. You can find discontentment in anything, and you can find contentment in anything. So not giving place to the disappointment, and allowing that fear to creep in, and all of those things, I think that was huge. The other thing is, with Ryan and I, it's been this constant like I said, we're faith people, and we've seen God move in Preston's life and do miracles and answer prayers, and we're believing for more. So it's also that tension of living in that tension of being content with him and loving him for who he is and how he is, but yet believing for the fullness of healing that God can do in his life, the miracle that God wants to do in his life. So not settling. Does that make sense? But yet totally. So it's this tension of like faith versus living in the present reality of where we are.
I know that we're going to be wrapping up here shortly. If you could say anything to somebody who is about to embark on this journey, let's say somebody has a diagnosis of Down syndrome for their child, what is something that you would...
You're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And there are a lot of resources and support and communities available to you. So I would say don't isolate yourself. Be intentional to reach out. And then the other thing is prayer works. We serve a real, living, miracle working, powerful God who is present. He wants to work in our lives. He is working in our lives. And so, like I said, he's done so much in Preston's life already, and we're believing and contending for more, and he'll do the same for you.
I love that. That is the whole purpose of this podcast. And, my whole heart for the Nursing Mothers Room is that mothers and parents find themselves in community with those around them, because we're not meant to do this alone. And I guarantee you that you're not alone in it, So Sorry. Oh, we got the little one waking up from her nap. But yeah, I absolutely love it. And I am very grateful that you were able to come and share your story with us. And we love seeing Preston grow and thrive and can't wait to see what the Lord does in him and, through you and your family. And yeah, just thank you for joining us today and everybody for tuning into the Nursing Mothers Room. We will talk to you guys soon.